Hello everyone, welcome to the third lecture of the topic nanomaterial as unit 5 in your engineering chemistry course. So just to get started, as I said, my name is Dr. Anandarup Goswami. I am from Division of Chemistry at VFSTR, Department of Sciences and Technology, and today I am going to be talking about the history of nanomaterials, which we started in the last class. So let's recapitulate some of the things that we started. Okay. So before my session begins, let's start what we have done so far. We have introduced the nanoscale, we have defined the nanomaterials, we have talked a little bit about the importance of nanomaterials, and we briefly started talking about the history of nanomaterials, right? And if you follow my last lecture, you will find out that we have divided so-called this history or the timeline into 3 phases. The first one is, it's an era of ignorance where people actually were using nanomaterials without knowing that they are nanomaterials, right? So that's the first part, and that actually took pretty much a lot of our time scale, right? After that, after 18th century, people started realizing little bit because of the advancement of their scientific knowledge as well as their technological knowledge also. Okay, so they started developing some understanding between 18 to 1980. Okay, once after that, this is the part that we are currently in, that is from 1980 to present world. So before going to this part, actually what we have talked about before, that we have discussed certain examples. We have discussed certain examples, along with I have tried my best to give you so-called the people who are actually involved with those discovery. Obviously during prehistoric time or during the 4th century or 13th century examples that we have given you earlier, we couldn't do that. But I have tried to give you most of the eminent figures who have contributed significantly to the development of that era, right? That pretty much sums up the first 2 phases of our timeline. So today what we will be talking about, and in that context also, we have actually defined some other terms like nanotechnology, which was defined by Taniguchi from Japan, and we have also elaborated something about Professor Feynman, about when he talked about in his famous lecture that there is plenty of room at the bottom, right? So basically what he was trying to say that there is enormous opportunity if you start minimizing things. So that was the motivation of developing a field in nanotechnology, right? So, and also there comes Professor Moore also, with the Intel founder, who also developed nowadays what we call as Morse scale. Okay, so this was something that we have already talked about, and now we are at a platform where we know that okay, nanotechnology is actually important. At least till 1980, people were developing something which now they can be utilized for further progress. Now we wanted to highlight what are the progress that have been done during the next phase, which is from 1980 to present. And this part of nanotechnology or nanotechnological development or the development of nanoscience, we will call it as modern age of nanotechnology. Okay, so here in the same way that we have figured out this earlier part, here also we try to give you some ideas, some examples of the milestones, some of the milestones in nanotechnology. So if you remember this part, we know that time, at least around 1980, people are starting finding out different ways of looking at things, looking at something which is really small, like at the nanoscale. Along with that, we have also told you that there is opportunity for further development in quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics, when it started at the beginning, from that to the journey that they had till 1980, it was quite impressive. And people, because of this utilization, or rather because of this collaboration between quantum mechanics along with other field of science, it has been possible, at least during that time, to actually come up with newer theories, some of which, rather most of which, often belong to the nanomaterial or nanotechnological subjects. So this is where we set up our platform from the last lecture. So today we will start from the modern age of nanotechnology. So the first example that I am going to show you, which is around 1981, which is Gerd Binning and Heinrich Rohr. They are two German physicists. They invented scanning tunneling microscope. Now what is it? Obviously we are not going to discuss a lot about these things, but these are the microscopes which actually allowed us, at least for the first time, to see individual atoms. Individual atoms is actually below nanometer scale. Okay, nowadays it went to a level, I will show you one example of that later on, that you can actually see individual atom on a surface. So obviously when they started, that time it was not that, it didn't have that kind of high resolution, but it was the beginning point. That actually allowed us to develop the field in such a way by which, so that we can come up with newer ways of looking at things which are really small. Just to give you one example of that, this is a molecule called olympicin. There are 5, you can call it as benzene rings, that are synthesized. So if you look at the Olympic logo, there are 5 rings side by side like this. So that's how they synthesize this part. And this picture is actually an STM image nowadays, which is scanning tunneling microscopic image of that molecule at that level. So you can really do that at the individual atom level. So that's the beauty of this, and for this they have been already awarded Nobel Prize. So Gerd Binning is a very unique scientist, rather physicist. While developing this, he actually contributed to several other fields. And one of them, between 1981 to 1986, he developed another microscopy. This microscopy is called atomic force microscopy. It is not that different. The basic principle is almost the same, but it is actually allows us to take a picture of the surface. For example, I have given you one surface. I have written it, I should have skipped it. This is actually the surface of an image sensor of your iPhone. This is an atomic force microscopic image. And these, whatever ups and downs you are seeing, they represent the resolution that you can have. Okay, so this is very powerful technique. In fact, because of these two, nowadays this field of nanolithography, I will talk about it in a bit, in a second, has progressed so much. This is a very unique technique on which you have a surface and you have we call it as cantilever. It goes and touches the surface and it senses something. We are not going to discuss the physics behind it because those are very complicated physics. Once it touches and senses something, it records how it is touching, and based on that these plots are generated. Okay, so this is about looking at things, about seeing this, because unless you can see things, it's a bit difficult for you to think about other applications or how to manipulate those structures. That's why it becomes so important. So then come another big milestone. You remember when I first started talking about that fire thing in the beginning of first lecture or the second lecture, last lecture rather. I said that the suits and everything they are actually forming nanomaterials. So in these, when you actually lit a candle, whatever you are forming as a soot, they contains carbon nanotubes. Now among the carbon nanotubes, among the other species that are also formed with carbon nanotubes, one of them is also called fullerene. Though it was not discovered that way, but later they found out. Okay, so in fact, because of that part, so you see, Harold Kroto, Robert Curl, and Richard Smalley, these three are pioneers from Rice University, USA. They synthesize a molecule, or rather they actually characterize and they identified that it exists in nature, which looks like this. This is called C60 or Buckminster fullerene. Nowadays it is more commonly known as buckyball. It's a geodesic structure where you have all these carbon atoms attached together to give you this ball shape. Okay? And remember, one interesting thing is that this is actually the starting of the carbon-based nanostructure, at least at the synthetic scale. You will get to know more about this in subsequent lectures because fullerene is in your syllabus, we will actually go through the details of how to synthesize fullerene and what are the applications. But this is the first report of fullerene, and they identified the structure. Later on they identified that it doesn't have to be C60, it could be C70, C80 like that. Okay, so it contains some 6-member rings, some 5-member rings, depending on how it is actually designed and how it is oriented in a 3-dimension. It's very, very unique molecule to look at. Okay, so because of this also these three got Nobel Prize. Okay, so this is actually sets up the stage for developing carbon-based nanomaterials. That's actually a huge jump, because previously whatever attempt that people were making, they are mostly from the metal-based system. Now at this level they found out that okay, it's not just the metal, even carbon can form nanostructures, and they have very, very unique properties at the nanoscale. So we'll come back to some of this again some carbon nanomaterials will come. So in the meantime, when it was developing, remember that any field or any topic of discussion, it has to be reachable to the larger audience. Then and only then you can say that particular discussion or topic is actually rather it's worth pursuing. When Feynman first started that lecture in 1959, that lecture actually was marked as a milestone to develop a nanotechnological world, so to say. Now, in 1986, Drexler, what he did, he essentially took that concept. He was working in somewhere, but he was not particularly interested in working it at the nanoscale. But once he understood the potential of nanotechnology, he started working on it, and eventually he wrote a book. This book, you should read all this particular book, because this book is not exactly about the science, rather it's the potential of that particular field. The book says it's the engines of creation, the coming era of nanotechnology. Okay, this is a very unique book, and not only that, as I said, it has to reach larger audience, right? Not only it actually reached larger audience, it created a lot of controversy. There was a big debate between Derek Drexler and Harold Kroto or Richard Smalley, because in this case, in this particular book, Drexler commented on something which was very controversial, because those things were not achieved during that time. Okay, which Other people have protested, they said no, that cannot be done, and it went on. So that's why I'm saying that this field of work is very, very interesting. You should read Eric Drexler book and the subsequent controversies. You will see that scientists are not always naive. They actually fight for anything that they believe in. Okay, that is very important. Okay, and just to be very sure, I have given most of the cases. I have given the source. Okay, so if you are interested, you can go back to the source, start finding out more. So here, during that time, people in different electronics company also started coming up. They started coming up to build a so-called nanotechnological platform for their own benefits to make things better. But they also had an agenda to move this field forward. And that's how a science or engineering should merge to take a particular problem or a particular challenge to solve a particular challenge. While doing this, Donald Eigler at IBM, it's a company but they have R&D section, so a research and development section, they actually engage, they put lot of money during that time, they still do. They put lot of money for the development of nanotechnology because they knew that it's the future. People will be using it for pretty much every applications possible. So what this guy did, if you look at this, you can read IBM, I, B and M. When you first look at it, it doesn't look that impressive. Okay, anyone can write IBM, right? But think of this way, in this way, that these blue ones that you see, they are actually 35 individual xenon atoms. And they put, it looks like as if they are writing. This is one of the first examples of kind of writing at a nano world, at a nanoscale. Okay, so they took each xenon atom and they put it like this. This was a remarkable achievement because if you can make this kind of thing, that means technically you can put atoms wherever you want. You can take, I'm not talking about bulk, I'm not talking about big things. Okay, when you write, if you write, your line thickness is way bigger than nanoscale. Here at the nanoscale, they can manipulate the structure. So this considered to be one of the first atom and a successful atom for precise positioning of atom on surface using scanning tunneling microscopy. Again, they used scanning tunneling microscopy. Okay, so this was a very big achievement at that time. As I said, so based on those achievements, so till now we have discussed about how to look at this using STM, how to make pattern using STM, and something about fluorine, which is a carbon-based nanomaterial. Okay, so now in 1991, in 1991, Sunio Iijima from NC Japan, what he discovered a typical, very peculiar material, which is nowadays we call it as carbon nanotubes. What are these nanotubes? You see, the nanotube structure looks like this, where all these red ones, they are actually carbon atoms. So these carbon atoms are bonded to each other. Okay, and this is a TEM micrograph. Okay, transmission electron microscopy image. This is how it actually looks like. Look at the thickness. It's 10 nanometer scale. So that means this thickness is around 8 nanometer. You see, it's so small. It's really small. It's really at the nanoscale because we have defined nanomaterial that if at least one of the dimension is between 1 to 100 nanometer, then we can call it as nanomaterial. So this is definitely nanomaterial, and later we found out that it has got immense potential. It's very strong. It's actually, this, if you look at their electronic properties, are very, very unique. And that actually revolutionized the way we think of carbon-based nanomaterials. So sad part is, fullerene, which is considered to be zero-dimensional nanomaterial, that actually got Nobel Prize. The next one, this is called one-dimensional because this is elongated in one. We'll discuss more in so-called during the classification of nanomaterial. So this one-dimensional nanomaterials, it didn't get Nobel Prize as of yet. But the next one, two-dimensional nanomaterial, which is graphene, they got Nobel Prize already. So we are hopefully, IGMA will be given Nobel Prize at some point of time. But this is something, again, is very, very important discovery as far as nanomaterials are concerned. Okay, so nowadays a lot of people are working in this area to come up with the better properties of carbon nanotubes and graphenes and other carbon-based nanomaterials as well. Okay, so this is 1991. In 1992, while this was going on, if you can look at this entire graph or rather timeline, you will see that it's just not only scientists are working in the field. There's a possibility that, in fact, with scientists, there's a huge number of people who are working at industry. They were also looking at things at the nanoscale. They wanted to know what was going on. Okay, so in during that part, another example is a mesoporous silica, which is called MCM41. Okay, so as far as the mesoporous silica is concerned, so 1992, mesoporous silica was developed. So silica means sand, essentially sand that you find in sea beach, and they also have the same composition, at least similar composition as this kind of silica, but they have prepared in lab. What is the difference between those sands and these sands? Actually, they are prepared in a particular fashion, which we are not going to discuss too much, but I will just highlight the term mesoporous. Mesoporous means this material contains some pores which is between 2 to 50 nanometer. So when you take a transmission microscopic image, so these are the pores that you can see. Okay, and these pores, so these are the opening of the pores. Now if you take a cross section of this, these are the pores that you can see. So these are like channels. In the material, just by designing, they can come up with this kind of material. What are the advantage of this kind of material? This is actually has got tremendous potential in lot of catalytic applications, refining application, purifying applications, because these materials, they have very high surface area. When we talk about the properties, you will get to know you'll get to know better why high surface area is needed, but eventually you'll understand you want to have higher surface area for any applications where you want more active sites to be present. So that's why this is again mesoporous silica is the pore size between 2 to 50 nanometer. And if you look at this pore size, they will be in that region. Okay, so this is very, very unique applications. So we started with carbon nanomaterial. During this time, they also, carbon is pretty much conducting, at least the ones that they develop. Okay? But this one, silica, people used to think that they are inactive, they don't do anything. But because of this kind of system, they now, at least not now, during that time they started to realize its potential. Nowadays it's being used in lot of applications. Okay? Now, while doing that, so we slowly are moving towards so-called popular applications, so-called more advanced applications. So we started with evolution of microscopy a little bit. Now we also started looking at the so-called carbon-based nanomaterial. Silica, I just explained to you. Now in 1993, this scientist from MIT, Boundy, actually very good scientist, what they found out, Ian Quarker, what they have found out is that depending on a particular combination of metal sulfide, especially derived from this cadmium and zinc and to some extent lead also, depending on that kind of system, you can generate a very tiny nanomaterial, and those nanomaterials optical property are very different. So this is their optical property. When they glow in dark, if you put UV light to it, they glow. Just by varying different combination of this precursor, they glow from so-called blue to red. And this particular type of material is called quantum dot. Okay, in these cases, this is also all three dimensions are at the nanoscale. Okay, so this is called zero-dimensional quantum dots. We'll get to know about this later on. But what I'm trying to say, that not only the carbon and silica that people are discovering and the new properties were being discovered, also some metal-based system which people didn't think that they could be used in such a different way. Previously, during 16th to 17th century, 13th century, we have explained a little bit about the potential of gold and gold, silver for coloring glasses, right? But in this case, there is no gold or silica, gold or silver. In this particular case, this combination is good enough, though it requires some special techniques for synthesis of this kind of material. But if you can synthesize, they can be used in variety of applications which requires them to glow in dark. Okay, or rather on the illumination of a particular wavelength. So this is something that we really wanted to get. This was very interesting. Then slowly people were moving from the synthesis and looking at things to the application part, especially whether this can be used for anything other than electronics. Because electronics, by the time people were working on it, for IBM, they know this is a big computer company, right? They were looking at things as far as electronics are concerned. But whether that can be used in a different way or not. In one of the challenges that people had is the precise manipulation of at the atomic level. I told you one example that IBM people actually made 35 xenon atoms on IBM and written IBM on a particular wafer. But whether that can be used universally or not, people are not sure. So in 1999, Chad Merkin, he actually developed one technique. Nowadays it's called deep pen nanolithography. in short DPN. What it does is essentially follows the same technique which actually atomic force microscopy uses. So you have a cantilever of atomic force microscopy. The top, or rather the tip of the cantilever, is at the atomic scale, which is almost around 1 to 2 nanometer, or maybe in that range. So that part was very, very tiny. It's at the nanometer scale. If you take that, put it into an ink. Ink means, in this case, not our ink, it's something else, whatever you want to write. For example, any compound that you want to use for writing on something. If you put it and take it and then start writing at a surface, then you will get a precise patterning of your material on the surface. Okay, this is how it is done. So essentially, this is your probe, or rather cantilever of atomic force microscopy. You take that, you put it into some ink or the material that you want to pattern on the surface. Then you take that, you just start writing that, and eventually you can manipulate both the thickness as well as the breadth depending on the process that you are using. So this is a very, very unique term, unique applications. People have still been using this particular type of system because this is one of the ways by which you can actually manipulate the structure at the atomic level. During that time, as I was telling, that people are also starting to look beyond the electronics application. Once they started to look around that, then in around 2003, Naomi Harris from Rice University again, what she did, she actually showed that you can synthesize nanomaterials, especially you can coat, this is a silica surface. It's not exactly the same silica that I have talked about, but this can also be made at the nanoscale. This is a silica surface, and the yellow one that you are seeing, those are actually gold nanomaterial deposited on silica surface. So you can actually put them on the silica surface, and this material, because of the unique electronic property, can be used for different applications. One of the applications that she has shown, that if you take this material, if you absorb a particular sensor and the drug, then if you actually put this through our blood vessel, then there's a possibility that it will find the cancer cell and it will kill them. So it was first demonstrated with the treatment for the treatment of breast cancer. Okay, so this is a very, very unique opportunity for the scientists at that point to think beyond their electronic applications of nanomaterials. Nowadays, people have started coming out with different other applications as well. Okay, so while doing this, people were actually thinking a lot about what to do next, right? You always think, okay, this is done, then what can I do next? As I told you, when Kroto, Smalley, they actually discovered fullerene, that time people didn't know what to do with those carbon materials apart from characterization and certain applications. Nowadays people know much more. But after that, when Iijima actually synthesized carbon nanotube, then people started to think, okay, maybe there are some more potential that can be also explored. Now while doing this, another part, so if you look at the first one, as I said, your fullerene structure looked like this. Okay, so this is your fullerene. Your nanotube look like this. Now, during that research, people have found that okay, carbon nanotubes has some they have some very unique properties. Okay, the strength, their electronic properties are very unique than whatever they have seen earlier. Okay, so now they said that okay, you have a rod. This is what the rod. This is a carbon nanotube. Now, what happens if I take a scissor and start cutting it like that? What you will get? So eventually, if you do that, if you take a scissor and start cutting it, you will get a flat surface, right? So this flat surface is essentially, nowadays we call it as graphene. But this idea of cutting this nanotube to this didn't come as it is, didn't come easily. So before doing that, what people thought, while people are starting to realize this kind of ideas, what people did, they took the most common carbon material, at least at this scale, and they knew that the structure of it, that is graphite. Graphite is nothing but a multi-layer of graphene. It can go much more. So in 2004, Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov, what they did, they took a graphite you can find in pencil. They took a graphite and they put a tape on top of it. It's very unique methodology. Nowadays people are also using it. They put a tape on the graphite and they peel it off. Now, let's say your graphite, as I said, like this, has got 100 layers of it. When you put a tape and you peel it off, out of 100, maybe 2 or 3 or 5 maximum may be coming out. Now, when that came out, that particular thing has got way more different property than the graphite itself. And that, especially in electronic applications, it was extensively used because of the hybridization of carbon. In all the cases, these carbons are, most cases, sp2 hybridized. So essentially that means this is what is being explained here. Okay, you have the pencil, which is a multi-layer graphene or graphite. If you take it out, you are taking single layer out. Once you take single layer out, that particular material, we call it nowadays as graphene. So graphene is nothing but a single layer of graphite. Rather, in other ways, graphite is nothing but a multi-layer graphene. But the property-wise, graphite is a bit different than the graphene. And graphene has got immense potential in lot of applications. At the same time, this is considered to be one of the wonder material of today's world. Okay. So, and as I said earlier also, they have been also awarded Nobel Prize in 2010, I think. So within 6 years of their invention, they got the Nobel Prize. Think about it. So in 2005, as I was telling the other day about the applications of graphene, rather applications of nanomaterial in different computer applications. Okay, let's go back. So in 2005, as I was telling the other day, that Morse curve already told you something about the potential of a particular transistor being placed in an IC or nowadays microprocessor. Okay, so maximum there is a limit, and the limit keeps on increasing over 2 years, right? It gets doubled in 2 years, something. So in 2005, Intel reached a milestone of having more than 1 billion transistors in a microprocessor. This is considered to be huge because, as I said earlier, that making things small is challenging, but if you really can do that, it has got immense potential in different applications. In this case, in your computer, you can make things faster, you can make things more efficient, and you can obviously for storage also, that's a separate type of thing, but not related to this particular one. But in a one microprocessor, you can have 1 billion transistors. Just think about it. Okay, this is really a great milestone in the field of nanotechnology. Okay, this is only possible because people have started extensively working on this particular topic since the idea came up. Okay. So another milestone that they achieved, though it is not executed at a large scale till now, but this is something. James Tour at Rice is a very big shot. He is a very well known chemist. So what they have found out, they have synthesized a nano car with this oligophenylene ethylene with alkyl axles, so which are these guys, and these are your fullerene. So you can make a nano car, and what they have found out, if you increase the temperature, this moves on. This is a gold surface, this yellow one. If you increase the temperature, this moves. This is actually a really good examples of utilizing thermal energy to do something at the nanoscale. And that is actually also, this movement can be controlled by depending on the temperature. As they found out, above 300 degree it moves too fast, so they couldn't see it. So but at the moderate temperature or a little bit higher temperature, you can see they have image also, a microscopic image where they can show that it is moving really good. Okay, so this is actually one of the examples, as I said, of building a nano car. After that, James Tour has started developing nano cars with different types of functionalities. And if you go to this website, you will find other applications of James Tour. He's basically an organic chemist, but based on his organic chemistry ideas, he is actually manipulating this structure at the nanoscale. That's the beauty of knowing chemistry at the nanoscale. Okay, so this is James Tour, as I was telling James Tour. After that, in 2010, again it came back to IBM, who was the first one to actually develop or print IBM on a wafer. So he used a silicon tip to chisel away material from a substrate to create a complete nanoscale 3D relief map of the world. So at the nanoscale, they have crafted, they have from the level, they have manipulated this actually the speed of this particular tip by which they can chisel out the surface to get a 3D relief map of the world, 1/1000 of the size of grain of salt. And that too, this is, I'm talking about not only just the precision, but it's also about the speed. This can be done in 2 minutes and 23 seconds. This was a very big achievement, which shows that precision can be achieved even at a faster pace. Previous efforts that people are discussing, in most cases, they were actually doing it because they wanted to make things correct. Now, once they have good grasp about making things precise, making things correct. Now they wanted to actually explore that. They wanted to know how fast can they make them. Now this is one of the examples where you can actually take IBM, where you can actually make this particular 3D world map in 2 minutes and 23 seconds. This is again a very big achievement as far as IBM's this technique is concerned. So now we are almost at the end, because 2018, now it's 2020. This is another big achievement. Again, we started with so-called STM, scanning tunneling microscopy, by which you can visualize things, right? And I told you that, okay, while doing that, people are actually interested in looking at much smaller level. Now in 2018, David Muller from Cornell, they achieved a resolution of 0.39 angstrom. What does it mean? It means you can not only individually see the atom, you can actually look into their behavior very precisely. So if you look at this one, so this is 5 angstrom. So this is 5 angstrom. In fact, this difference that they did is 0.4 angstrom. It's even below the nanomaterial. This is actually a material called molybdenum sulfides. In this particular case, what they did, they took one molybdenum sulfide, one layer. They put another layer on the top and they twist it, and they wanted to see where the atomic positions are. Previously, we couldn't even think about single layer thing. Now, in addition to not only looking at the layer, but also you can actually see how things are oriented once you twist it. This is the highest resolution till now that people can achieve. Okay, so this is actually a very state-of-the-art techniques, not that easy to perform anywhere. This takes quite a lot of instrumental challenges, and it requires much more knowledge about advanced level physics and mathematics. Okay, so but my whole goal of discussing this entire history, I could have finished in just 1 or 2 slides, but I didn't want to do that, because I personally feel when I study something, if it is interesting to me, I should know how the field developed. Then and only then I will get the actual flavor of that particular topic. That's why I wanted to take a much bigger class, much longer class than what I could have done in 2-3 slides. Okay, so with that, nowadays what the status of nanotechnology? This is something that I have actually shown you before. So these are some of the examples where people are still using nanotechnology. Now while discussing this, I just highlighted on some of the terms. I didn't highlight all, right? It's not possible. You already know this, right? Last year, lithium-ion battery got Nobel Prize. That I told you also, that whatever you learn about lithium-ion battery, lithium-ion battery. So last year, lithium-ion battery got Nobel Prize, right? Now I told you also that lithium-ion battery utilizes these nanomaterials as electrode materials. Without the so-called involvement of nanomaterials, those efficiency of those batteries, or the life of the battery wouldn't be achieved, could not be achieved the way it is now. Okay, so that's why lithium-ion battery is one of the examples that I have told you. There are thousands of other examples. Okay, your iPhone, your laptop, pick it up, pick any of the things, and I told you earlier also, I'll convince that at least one of the component in that application will utilize a nanomaterial, okay, or one of the processes. Okay. So with that, we started with the era of ignorance. We actually went to the beginning of understanding, and lastly, we have also started looking at so-called the age of modern nanotechnology, or the rapid expansion of the field. Right? Hopefully now you have enough idea about how a particular field developed since almost its birth. Okay. Once again, I told you I have not given all the examples because it is not possible for us to give you that kind of information, and that will also not suffice our job. Our job was to give you the highlights so that you can now understand the importance of this historical development, and if you are interested, you can go back and start reading more about those things. That's the reasons why I have given all the references as well. Okay. So this is in one shot. This is one of the way to highlight this. Okay. This is again, there are other ways also. Other figures can be can also be used, but this is one of the figures that I am using. So again, it starts from 9th to 17th century, and it's kind of summarizes till 2020. But it didn't include all the examples that I have shown you. But what I wanted to point out is that if you look at the last one, see what is it saying. A study funded by the National Science Foundation estimate that 6 million nanotechnology workers will be needed worldwide by 2020, with 2 million of those jobs estimated to be in the United States. This is from American Chemical Society Council. That's why it is highlighting the US part. But what I am trying to say that this is a very, very interesting field to work on. If you are really interested, you can contribute a lot. If you can learn more, you can contribute a lot for its development. So if you are really interested, please let us know. Then we can try to think about how to utilize the concept of nanotechnology for doing something more. Okay. So having said that, I have another assignment for you. Now this is the reason, the main reason behind this assignment is to actually keep you engaged so that you can learn about nanotechnology. Okay. The assignment is very, very simple, because nowadays most of you, almost all of you are using smartphones, right? So the assignment is, you go online, you can use Google or any other search engine, search online and make a list of the scientists along with their contributions who have won Nobel Prizes because of their contributions in nanotechnology. Okay, so this is a job for you. Okay, this will also tell you about, if you are really interested, once you start looking into this, you will realize what are the things I have missed. Okay, you can also try to find out what are the missing linkages between one application to the another. So all these things will become very interesting for you if you really start looking into these things. Only one thing you have to remember, that Nobel Prizes are not given for nanotechnology. It's given for medicine, physics, chemistry, literature, peace, and economics. So as far as this particular assignment is concerned, you don't need to find this in literature, peace, or economics, but you can start finding the applications of nanotechnology in this particular field. In these fields, if you find how many Nobel laureates are there, among which who are the ones who have won the prizes for nanotechnology. Okay, based on their title or based on their contribution, if you start reading, then you will get to know about it. Okay, if you have any questions on that, please let me know. I'll be happy to give you any inputs that you may want. Okay, so with that, I'm going to conclude on this part. So till now we have finished this first 4. So from next class onwards, I'll focus more on the specific topics related to properties of nanomaterials. Okay, so with that, once again, thank you everyone. So hopefully we'll see you in the next class where I'll be discussing more of about the properties of nanomaterials. And as far as today's lectures are concerned, this will be the end of the history of the nanotechnology or nanomaterials lecture. Okay, so if you really want to know more, please don't hesitate to contact me. We'll be happy to help you. Thank you.